Hello, hello, and welcome back to Wednesdays. Again, Stacey Mulcahy, and I'm David Voiles, joining her this fine morning. On this second module, we're going to be going over using jQuery to make I know I abbreviated this, you were saying before not to.
SPA!
Okay, single page apps, SPA. So at our during our last talk, we gave you the wrong code mistakenly. So this one kind of looks like Singapore apps. So really, what you're going to want to do is go to aka.ms, MVA voucher, and there you can redeem this code. This is SIN, short for single, page, apps, VS, and get additional points for you joining us here today.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can say that was my fault.
Yeah, no, it happens to the best of us. It happens to the best of us. We weren't well caffeinated this morning, so granted, we did go to two different Starbucks that were less than a block away from each other, so I think it's a Seattle problem.
Seattle problems.
Yeah.
Hashtag Seattle problems.
We don't have that in Philadelphia.
I laughed when I saw that.
Maybe for cheesesteaks. We have that issue for cheesesteaks, but not for this.
New York would be bodegas.
Or yeah,
we choose a bodega.
Yeah.
It could be anywhere.
Or bagels. I miss bagels.
Okay, focus.
Yes,
concentrate. Yes. So there's a couple questions that actually came up in the chat, and I think they're just worth really quickly maybe just addressing.
Absolutely.
So Dave, there was a question that was, hey, for people who struggle with JavaScript,
yeah.
Maybe where do you think they should start? So like, you got a couple good resources?
Oh boy, do I. Okay.
So not a whole session on this.
I started with C#. I love it, but when I went to JavaScript, here are two tricks of the trade. First is John Racy's book, Secrets of the JavaScript Ninja.
But he used Ninja.
I know. Well, so what's wrong with that? Should you use Samurai or what?
No ninjas, no rock stars, no gurus. Can we all just agree on that?
The JavaScript professional, perhaps?
I would be okay with that.
Okay, the JavaScript professional. So definitely check into that book. It gives real practical examples of how you would actually use jQuery as a whole. Fantastic. And also Douglas Crockford, who is, he says he's the discoverer of JSON, not the founder, discoverer of JSON. He has JavaScript, the good parts, which you'll often see people comically tease next to a book that's JavaScript a whole. The book is this big, and then his book is about 100 pages and this small. But I highly, highly suggest starting with those because he walks over what are the good parts, what are the bad parts, and why is all this actually in JavaScript, and why you should avoid some things.
Yeah, I think the other thing about JavaScript is straight up give yourself a little project. Don't go, I think it's awesome that we have all these programs where you can I'm going to learn JavaScript online, I'm going to type this line of code and then type this. I'm going to assume that most people who are kind of asking this probably come from some kind of language background, even a little bit. Give yourself a project.
Yep, definitely.
It can be very simple, very small. You can be like, I just want to create something that's going to, take input from here and do this or whatever. Mm-hmm. But that, to me, is if you don't have a project, you have no focus.
Yeah, absolutely, because you'll really start to understand some of the intricate parts of JavaScript, like functional scope as opposed to block scope, right? Global variables and how all this works.
Yeah, just, you're motivated.
Yes.
You're actually motivated to learn.
Simplicity is key.
Yeah, someone else, just one other question I thought that we could quickly address was someone had asked about, okay, with single page apps, how do we go about making them responsive, right? And, responsive is let's just kind of clarify responsive very quickly. Mm-hmm. Responsive design, it's not just about layout, it's also about behavior.
Thrashing, you do not want thrashing everywhere.
Well, it's, a lot of people think that responsive is the idea of basically making your browser bigger and smaller. No, that's not what it's about. It's actually about just making sure that all devices have a good experience with the content.
Absolutely.
Right? And so when it comes to responsive design, an easy way to get started is just simply Bootstrap.
I was just going to say that.
If you don't know a lot about responsive design, Bootstrap is probably, and it's everywhere, all sites are starting to look a little the same. It's got its issues. But with Bootstrap, literally it's you dump it in, you can get going. So that's one way to do, your layout stuff quite easily.
It's extremely well documented too, very customizable.
Very, very well documented, very customized. The other thing when it comes to responsive or creating a responsive experience where, you're going to be, that the desktop might be look a little different, maybe act a little different. A prime example is, someone might have touch and you might want to do specific things for touch. So you might want to do stuff like feature detection. And so if you're looking at that kind of thing, you want to look at Modernizer, for example.
Definitely.
Common library, it goes in, it does feature detection, puts all the features that you may support, so CSS gradients.
Yes.
You could be, do you support local storage, a history API? Do you support touch?
Right.
It tells you all those things. You can then kind of go and say, if I have touch, do this.
Right.
Right. So if I support CSS, the CSS3 transitions, use them. If not, maybe I'm going to use jQuery.
Some kind of fallback.
Yeah, I'm going to have a fallback. So you need to consider Modernizer. And the other thing you probably want to look at very quickly is file loading.
Yep.
And so you don't want to load libraries that a user is never going to use. So there's a lot of libraries, for example, for touch, right? Dealing with swiping, dealing with that kind of touch. That kind of abstract it for you and make it very easy for you.
Yes.
You don't want to load that in for someone who doesn't have touch.
That's right.
Right? So you want to kind of like make sure that, yes, they have it, then I'm going to load it.
Yeah.
And so those are kind of some of the tactics you can start to use when thinking about responsive site and thinking about that in terms of an SVA.
Absolutely. I'm glad you bring up that question and many of those answers, because shortly or later on, another of our modules are going to be covering various frameworks you can use and really the pros and cons of a lot of them.
Yeah. And just, I think throughout the way we'll try to like put in just a little of these things that are, like if you're doing something for mobile, you might need to consider this, or if you, it'll come along the way. But I think just a couple of questions that popped out were those two. So thanks for the questions. They're great questions.
Definitely.
And whoever was saying TypeScript all the way, I'm with you. Yeah, I'm in your corner.
Tons of trouble.
Totally. All right, so let's get started.
All right, moving on here. So I want to first preface this by saying all information is publicly available on GitHub right now. So to github.com/DaveOils, you can find MVA jQuery. Really, we should have something about Angular in there, but it's the project that Stacy and I both worked on. We're going to continue to update it for the next day or so with more information, but that is what we're actually working on right now. So you can go there and really pull in our latest revisions. But now that's out of the way, let's go on to this module overview. So we're quickly going to discuss when and why we would use jQuery. Again, you don't always have to use it, but it's very helpful. We're going to create a very rudimentary interface. When I say rudimentary, I mean about as beginner and basic as you can get.
What was that you said about design, Dave?
I know. You should see her PowerPoint slides compared to mine. Also going to capture user interaction, very simple thing to do. Finally, Stacy's going to cover how to create an Azure mobile service. So
Best thing since sliced bread.
I'm telling you, it really is.
So good.
It is extremely easy to put together and to build, and I think you'll be really amazed and blown away on how to do that. Finally, with that Azure mobile service, we're going to ping our backend, and we're going to get data. So we're going to retrieve information from this table, this mobile service, as well as have the ability to post data to it.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah, so we're going to start flying here.
You got a motor.
Yeah, hope you're pull up your boots and let's get going.
When would you use jQuery? Why? I'm going to be the devil on your shoulder. Why would you use jQuery?
Yeah, you know what? Some people are going to say, I always use it and I have to use it. Well, I think in years past, jQuery is really an abstraction that allowed us to work with more browsers in an easier way. You know, the beautiful thing about web standards is that there's so many to choose from, and the browser vendors just can't always get on the same page, right?
They've gotten a lot better.
Yes, they absolutely
Everyone
have.
has gotten a lot better in the last couple of years. Yeah,
it was like the Wild Wild West in the past, which
Yeah.
I think really painted web development like a bad image. But now it's much, much better.
It's gotten better. Yeah, definitely.
You go to sites like caniuse.com to really see which features are actually implemented in which browser, maybe what the current road plan is like to get them there and the standards. So when and how or where would I use jQuery? Well, essentially, jQuery is an abstraction, so it does many, many things. It is a DOM navigation and manipulation tool. So DOM is the document object model. That's essentially what we're looking at inside of our browser every time we go to open it up and load these new pages. It can also do things like handle events. So I can add a click event to a button. So when I go to click this button, it's going to do something. Well, we can easily do that with jQuery. And event handlers were previously different for each browser. So that's where this really, really helps us out. Like Stacy had mentioned about Modernizer earlier, this really helps to abstract things and really write the code one time, and it works on most of the browsers at this point. Animation's another great thing.
Yeah.
So there are really two schools of thought when it comes to animations now. Many people tend to do it in CSS because we have both 2D and 3D animations and transitions, but jQuery can also handle that for us too. So instead of having to write a lot of your own transitions, your fading, your hiding, your displaying, we can just use jQuery to really help us out there. And then, like mentioned before, cross-browser compatibility.
That's a mouthful, isn't it?
Yeah, cross-browser compatibility. CBC. Okay.
Well, I think jQuery originally was created to kind of address the cross-browser bit,
yes.
right? So, like, I think it started out as being like, wow, the way that you make an AJAX call or, any of those kind of calls is different across the browsers.
Yeah, definitely.
The way that you access the DOM is different across the browsers.
Right.
Right? And so, originally, it was a library that was created to kind of address those things and make it kind of like a Swiss Army knife.
Yes,
kind of
exactly.
How I think of it. So it's like it abstracts that and does all that kind of work. So it really doesn't require you to have that intimate knowledge necessarily. It's one of those libraries that you don't have to look under the hood.
Yeah.
I'm not saying you shouldn't, but that, it abstracts everything for you.
Unfortunately, it's very well documented too, and widely used on the internet. So it makes it much, much easier to work with and to see the documentation. So you are certainly much more proficient with SEO than I would be. Do you know any ways that perhaps jQuery could help out with SEO, or how it's different than using something like Angular?
No, I mean, I think SEO concerns are more about architecture of what you're building, more so, and your content, than it is about what you choose to build something in.
Right.
So I would think that, jQuery, once again, really doesn't have much to do with that. It's about the approaches that you're using to actually build that site. Are you doing progressive enhancement and loading in a snippet from another page, for example, that's linked somewhere else? There's a whole bunch of approaches for that. So I would say it doesn't really matter. It's more of an architecture, going forward and how you're building it.
Perfect. All right. So creating user interface. So for a user interface, essentially you want to KISS, or keep it simple, stupid, or silly. So we want to keep it as simple and straightforward as possible, particularly for this example in this demo. So I'm going to go in and show you actually what this looks like real quick, and I'll pop back and forth between my slides. So again, I have all this illustrated for us immediately because I do not trust my skills to code live on the fly, particularly with JavaScript, which is a dynamically typed language. So I'm missing one little button or thing here, and it's not going to work out super well for us.
I know that pain.
Yeah. So why don't we take a look at the page real quick, and then we'll look under the covers and see what this actually looks like. So here is our page. You can see very, very simple. I mean, look at this UI. Fantastic. No Comic Sans, so that's a plus. But we have our simple MVA jQuery tutorial.
There's no styling on this page.
No, nothing
no
at all.
Bootstrap, no nothing.
No CSS.
This is vanilla.
I mean, yeah, we are just...
This is like back to the good old days.
Yeah. Simplicity is key, right? So I said, KISS. We want to keep it super simple here. So at the top here, we have a list of evangelists. Oops. So we have a list of evangelists. Okay, I thought I was going to do a square, but that didn't work out so well. There we go. I'm learning new tools today, so it's good.
That's a good drawing.
Yes. So we have a list of evangelists. So right here, the first two that I have actually are ones who are statically typed on the page. So we have that hard-coded that will never change. Everything else here, though, we decided to add and pull from our mobile service, which we'll go over shortly. Also, towards the bottom, I wanted to have the ability for the user to actually add an evangelist. So right here, we have a little input field where you can type in a name as well as a location and add them to this list right here. So now I know what that looks like. Go back into Visual Studio, we'll take a look. So we have a very simple HTML document page, right? Nothing super fancy here. But if we're going to use jQuery, we have to actually include it first. So there are a couple of ways we can do this. Okay? At the bottom of the page here, I have script source, and I'm referencing jQuery. But you see I have CDN.js. So CDN is really a way of distributing content or JavaScript or web files for us to be able to get from any point, correct?
Right. So CDN basically is just a content distribution network, right?
Yep.
So often what you do is you will put your files up on a CDN, or you'll reference them from a CDN so that you or your server is not always getting the hit.
That's right.
Right?
So they're often mirrored across a country or across the world. So this way, if I'm over here in Seattle writing this, and I have a user in the Middle East, they don't have to then ping Seattle to get that file every time. It may be mirrored on another server over somewhere in the Middle East so they can get it very, very quickly. Also what it does, it allows me to keep my package size small. Because you'll see just beneath that, I also have another script source for my index.js file. So I have that stored locally because you can see assets/js/index. And what that means is I just have this file stored right over here in my solution view on my jQuery assets.js index. Even better, I can hold Control and click, and it should bring me, I just want to bring me there, to that file. Now you can see I have this stored locally. Nice and clean. Okay, let's go back to our index.html page. So right up here, we have our header we have our evangelists, and I want to keep it super simple. Remember I said before we had our two hard-coded individuals. We have David and Stacy. Again, I can't type or highlight very well. And you saw all those other names, though. How did those other names get there? Well, we got there through the mobile service. So let's take a look at this. Our first thing we had to cover was input field for new entries, button to get or post requests. Okay, building UI. We just went over that very briefly. And now capturing user interaction. Okay, so for user interaction, we are going to use event handlers. So I want to do things like button clicks. When I click on that button to then post new data, how does it actually happen? I need to get data from our Azure mobile service, or I need to post data to our mobile service using event handlers. Well, let's take a look at how we put together both of these. So on this side, you'll see, actually, I have a button to add to the list. So I can add a name right here. Who would you like to add over here? Give me a good fictional character.
Let's add someone we work with, because
Tyler
he
Durden
might have said something in the chat.
Perhaps it's Michael Palermo.
Yeah, he definitely did say something.
And he is from Phoenix, Arizona. Okay, so click on Add to List. And I don't know what I did there. Oh, I wasn't connected to the service before. Sorry. Let me go back to this page. I did not deploy to this. There we go. And now let me add this. Michael, Palermo, and Phoenix, AZ. It did not want to add this for some reason. We'll have to come back and troubleshoot that, part of our debugging lesson.
Maybe just don't do the comma.
Oh, okay, I might do it.
I'm guessing.
Yes, that's what it was.
Yeah, because it'll see it as a query.
Yes. Perfect. So now we have Michael Palermo from Phoenix.
Someone just said, I think Azure was uncomfortable.
Yeah, I was like, wait a minute, you can't be doing this live coding over here. Okay, so we have that out of the way. So now you see we can easily add people to that list. So how are we doing this? Well, let's take a look at the one file I've included with this project, and that is our index file. So as soon as we, actually first let's show you how we pull in that information. Okay?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think what we're going to do, now that you've kind of seen the app working and you have a sense of what we're doing, very, very simple, just a list of people, right? And we're just adding to the list. We're not going through the whole CRUD operation. We're not removing everything else.
No.
It's just to show you how to get data and then also how to post to data. Mm-hmm. And so what we're going to show you, and I'm going to walk you through the portal in just a second, is just how to set up a mobile service very, very quickly. And mobile services in Azure, they're very simple. If you need to store very simple data, it's very, very easy. And it's very ideal for things like this, for things like you might have a game leaderboard in your game and you just need to go and send this object of a person with a score and whatever, and you just want to send it and you want to save it. It's really good for things that you don't need to massage the data necessarily a lot. If you do need to do that, you can, again, still do it in mobile services. You have to write a little bit of code. You can do that once again in JavaScript.
Perfect.
It's in Node, basically.
It's server side.
Right. But, if you need to create a REST API very, very quickly, this is probably one of the best ways to go. So I'm just going to open up the portal here.
Let's take a look over at Stacy's machine. This way we can have an understanding of what she's working on.
And we can have a sense of just kind of, I'm in the Azure portal. Now, Azure, again, is one of those things you can try. You can register and just get a trial. It's available through your BizSpark. I mean, there's a bunch of ways to get Azure. And if you haven't started using Azure and you're a web developer, it's really one of those things to kind of put in your toolkit.
Yes.
Because it allows you to work and deploy websites. It doesn't matter if you're doing HTML and JavaScript, if you're doing Node, if you're doing Python, if you're doing PHP, if you're doing .NET. It does, like, Azure,
the whole stack there for
Azure
you.
just like hugs them all.
That's right.
Basically, one big group hug.
Yeah.
And it's all of them, and it's all very, I want to say the steps to deploying is very, very straightforward. And, we're going to show that at the end, for example. But, don't be afraid of it if you come from a different programming language, something that's, like I said, like Python or something along those lines. Very easy to use. So in Azure, once you log in, you have a variety of things that you can do in Azure, and Azure provides you so much functionality. So you can create and deploy a basic website if you want. This is great if you're not going to configure a lot of things. Yep. If you need to put in a WordPress installation, if you have a basic HTML, JavaScript site, a basic Node site where you don't need to change the ports or those kind of things. It's really great, and it's especially if you're doing Node, if you don't need to compile things or need any of those kind of things, it's really great. Very straightforward. You can run virtual machines, mobile services. You can have push notifications. There's storage. There's all sorts of things that you can be doing on Azure. So we're going to show you mobile services. And mobile services is a very easy way to create a REST API. And for our project, it's ideal because we're just taking a little bit of information and we're storing it and then we're retrieving it. And again, we're only storing and retrieving, but we could be doing the whole kind of gamut. And so to create a mobile service, you click on mobile services on the left-hand side, and these are all the things. And again, we have a new portal. I'm using kind of the old, if you want to call it the old portal or non-preview portal. I love this portal more than anything. The new portal has its moments of beauty, but for me, this one is still my favorite. I show any designer this, and they are immediately like, I want to be using that because it's nice to look at and it's easy to use.
Yes.
And so that's what actually attracted me to it. I was like, oh, this looks nice.
Yeah.
And I know where things are. And user experience is really great. So for mobile services, we're just going to use it to create a REST API. And so what you need to do is you need to create a new mobile service. And so you just go up and you create a mobile service, and it's under Compute, Mobile Service, and you hit Create. And then you got to give it a URL or a name. So I'm just going to call this Test Dave.
Okay.
And you can use, if you don't have a SQL database, you do get one with Azure of a certain limit. So you can, use an existing SQL database. You can create a new one depending on your subscription. I'm just going to say use an existing one. I'm going to, choose a region that's close to me, and my back end is going to be JavaScript. Not going to worry about configuring push settings here. And it already selects a database that I have created. Gotta love that name, Area 51. Boop, boop. I get the nerd points for that one right there, right? And then login name. I'm going to have to probably remember this, or should I create a new one?
Yeah, I usually just let it throw in its own information for me. I can never remember any of that.
And let's just go like this, my password. Let's see if this is gonna. All right, so it is going to, oh, sorry, my credentials were not correct because I have to, it's okay. It's because you need the credentials. But what happens once you go through that process is it creates this kind of mobile service right here. Forgot, I need to go through my username and pass. And what happens is that with your mobile service, you get the dashboard, you get data, API scheduler, you get all of these things. And once you create your mobile service, it will show you down here your endpoint. So the endpoint we're going to be using is going to be this. And once we use this endpoint here, right, this is where we're going to be looking at, and it's kind of what's opened up to the user.
Yeah.
But the thing is that that's the endpoint. We have no tables. We have nowhere to store data.
There's nothing in there.
Right? So we need to go into data. And in data, you'll see for ours, I created a table. And you just create tables. You can create as many tables as you need.
Yep.
Right? And you can start to look, and you'll see all of these kind of IDs and everything else. And when you create your table, you're allowed to add columns. And so I have 2 columns, name and location, but I could add more columns, and I could select if they should be an index and those kind of things. So it's like really quickly setting up those items. And then the last step you need to do is permissions.
You don't want anyone and everybody just hitting this thing, right?
Well, and, depends. Maybe you do. Maybe you're creating a REST API that's like, I'm going to give you access to, it's
all of our data.
A language configure, a language thing that, you give it, you send it text, and it's going to give you it back as Yoda might speak to you, or
That's
something
right.
like that. You might want that public.
Clever that is.
It actually exists, right? So once we see permissions here, you have the choice of everyone. You can have it with an API key. You can have it with private, right? So you got a bunch of options. So you can choose any of these options. Now, for our service, we use application key, right? And if you've ever worked with an API, you're kind of used to the idea of like application key or secret or you know, ID, whatever it may be, however you want to call it across.
Basically your key to get through that front door, and the front door is the endpoint we're going to use.
Right, and it might be okay for several people to have that app key, and it might not.
House party, there we go.
It really depends, right?
Kid and Play is bringing everybody.
I want to go. Send me. I want to go to there.
Yeah.
So it really depends on what you're doing, and like I said, anybody with the application key here can go and access our service. And so to access a service, you can access certain tables. And so again, if we look at the endpoint for this service, you'll see it's here, and then it's /table/ the name of the table. So for us, we're going to probably be using /table/people, because that's the only one we care about, right? And so when we look at that, that's the endpoint that we're going to care about. The other thing we care about is managing keys. And so we have a key that we're going to need to send in the header, and you can just click on the managing keys, and you can get the key for it.
That's right. Or... right,
and it'll give you the key, and you can copy it, for example.
What if we don't want people to have access anymore? We can generate a new key, right?
We can generate a new key, for example.
Perfect.
Or, you know, we can go and select it and change it to private, or whatever we need to do.
It's like changing the locks in the front door.
Yeah, totally. So that's, you know, the idea of creating a very basic mobile service. And once again, we're using it very simply. We're using one table. We're not storing like your contact info in a second table and then trying to get data out of both tables.
Right.
Not doing anything crazy. Very, very simple. And there's no quicker way to get up and running than using this.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm glad you covered that, because now we can quickly go into how we're actually receiving this data. Now we see it's all stored on the back end there. So looking back on my screen, you can see that as soon as this page loads, I have what's called a self-executing anonymous function, which they do cover in both of those JavaScript books, by the way. So as soon as our page loads, it's going to pull in our script, right, which we saw right here at the bottom. It's going to say, hey, give me that index.js file. And as soon as the index.js file pops in, it's going to say REST GET. I'm going to call you. Let's take a look at REST GET.
So can you explain maybe, Dave, I'm just looking at your code here.
Sure.
Like document ready, for someone who doesn't know jQuery, what does that mean for someone?
Very good point. You're right. So this little $, I should have said, actually is short for jQuery. I can use that, or I can just write jQuery, and it'll both mean the same thing.
So that's it's global namespacing, right?
Exactly. So this document item essentially means that when this page is loaded and it's ready to accept JavaScript and everything is good, you give me a thumbs up at that point, I then want you to call this function. Otherwise, if I call REST GET before this document is ready for all my information, who knows which order everything's going to be called in, or if it's going to be drawn to the page correctly. So this really allows us to take control of how functions are called in JavaScript.
So at this point you're saying, give me the shell, make sure everything's loaded.
Yep.
And at that point, boom. Now I might want some data.
That's right.
Because I have everything I need at that point.
Yes, yes.
Gotcha.
In fact, I will show you exactly how it's going to work, because what it has to do is it has to pull in our jQuery file first. If I didn't have that jQuery file first loaded here, what happens is this will give me an error. It'll say, oh, I don't know what this $sign is. It's coming back as undefined. So because I have jQuery, it says, okay, I get this $, and now load this page. I'm ready to get call REST GET.
So if you see an error coming up in your console at any point in time that's like, this is undefined, chances are it's order of operations, right?
That's
like
right.
Something hasn't loaded and you're trying to access it beforehand.
That's right. JavaScript is single-threaded, so you can only do one thing at a time until you start kind of putting in asynchronous calls, which we won't get into today.
Okay.
But here is REST GET, a little function that Stacy put together for us the other day. Essentially, does exactly what it says. We are getting data from the server and drawing it to the page. So we're taking that endpoint, essentially that address that Stacy gave us earlier, and we're saying, hey, we're going to go there. We're going to get this information. What kind of information is it? Well, it's JSON. Now, before send, now that is an object that we have inside of this call. We're going to say set header. Well, you're probably looking at set header and thinking, well, what is this?
Yeah.
Let's go down here, take a look at set header. And sure enough, set header is used for authorization. So what this is doing, essentially, it's going to the endpoint we gave above, and we're saying, hey, here's the name of our little fake application. Xumo application.
Well, the header right there, if you're looking at that, Xumo application,
Yes.
that is the header that mobile services kind of puts in its namespace in terms of Xumo application. It comes from that. It's looking for that header explicitly. So you can't name it anything else. It's got to be that exact header, and you got to put in your key, for example.
Yes. So this key right here, this little string, is basically our key to that front door. So if anyone else has this key, boom, they can access our URL or endpoint, which I see people have already. Got all kinds of lovely things in there. So we go up here to REST GET. I'm saying, hey, go to this address and use this information, use my key. And right here, on success, so if, hey, we come back and we find, yes, they let us through the front door. I'm terrible at doing this.
Me too.
If they've let us through that front door, then do the following things. We're going to take all this data that we returned. That's basically our leaderboard, or our board you had before. For all the information there, we are then going to use, again, this is our jQuery object, evangelists append. And you're probably like, what is evangelists? Well, on the top, I just defined a few variables. So the first thing is variable, and I have evangelists is equal to jQuery evangelists. Well, what it's doing is looking for an ID at this point, a unique identifier on our HTML page. So I'm looking right here, and I'm looking for evangelists or an ID with evangelists, and boom, here we go. So this unordered list that I have is my evangelists object. So looking back on this index page, I go down, it says, to evangelists, we're going to append or add on to that this following list item. We're going to take a name, and for each object that we have in our leaderboard, right, it's our for loop. For each object there, we're going to take the name, have a little space, add location. And if we look back on our page, we have a name with the person's name, as well as their location and where they are currently located. So these first two are the ones that are hard-coded onto our HTML page, and everything else is what we're loading with this AJAX call.
So for IDs in a page,
yes,
you should only have one, right?
Well, you can only have one, yes.
Right? Well, people do it though.
Oh, it's painful.
You can do it.
Yes, yes.
But you shouldn't do it.
That's right.
Right? Because IDs are the idea that they're unique, right?
Right.
What if you needed to access a bunch of items? Would you use ID? Would you use something else?
There's something else you can use, and it's called a class.
Okay.
And a class is basically reusing that same thing over and over and over.
Right.
So it's creating multiple instances of the same thing. So
give me all list items in this list.
That's
with
right.
the class of evangelist or something would bring back a different result.
Absolutely.
So maybe like just in your jQuery, so you have var evangelist is equal to, and the pound sign means
that means
ID.
You're right, absolutely.
Right? So maybe, just understanding, like there's a pound sign evangelist, but if you wanted to access all items of a certain class, like maybe you had a slider and you needed all slides, you might look to the class.
Right.
Which means you wouldn't use a pound sign.
That's right. So in this case, we're just passing in a string. It's going to then resolve that string and say, okay, I'm looking for the ID of evangelists. And you see, even for where I define this variable here, I use this little jQuery $sign. You don't have to use that. I simply do it so that I know anytime I see this variable, I know it's referencing a jQuery object. Because otherwise, if I remove this, it could be a jQuery object, it could not be, I don't know. But now anyone else who looks at my code immediately knows, hey, this is jQuery right
So one of those best practices, I come and I look at it.
That's right.
You ask me to change something, I have no idea.
Yep.
And I go, oh, okay, well, this should have some functions on it from jQuery.
That's right.
So I could fade it down or fade it up.
Exactly. You can hide it, you can bring it back.
Do whatever I needed to do, append to it, etc., because it's a jQuery object.
Yeah, exactly. Immediately you know without digging into this code what it can and can't do.
Right.
So that's essentially why I do that here.
So is there another reason why you might go ahead and basically kind of create references to those items ahead of time rather than constantly...
Right. So earlier you had mentioned about making a performant application, right? We don't want to keep looking for the same things over and over. Well, this does exactly that. So right up here I say in my comment, cache the fields for name and location. The reason I do that is because we set this variable one time. So now anytime I need to reference this, it knows, okay, this is evangelists. Otherwise, we need to keep tracing up that DOM tree every time I go to say, hey, just look for evangelists. It's going to look through my entire document object model and say, where did I start and how do I get back over there? But now I have a little block of memory where I store this evangelist object, and I know, okay, point there every single time.
Right. And so the other thing being with that too is that, you know, if it's an ID, chances are, and you're accessing it, it exists in the page.
Yep.
It's not going to be changing.
That's right.
You know, maybe not, depends.
Yeah.
But, you know, something like classes where you might be adding things with a certain class,
right.
This might not work because there might be items added, so you might have to go and like do that call again.
Change it again.
Right. But for something that you're doing here, this totally...
Right, simplicity is key. It's all about what works best for what you are currently doing at that point. So we see now how we have the ability to get this. Again, I'm just appending there. And what happens if we aren't able to actually return that, right? Well, our little jQuery AJAX call we have right here, which you just called as a function. We've just named it to REST GET. This AJAX call also has an error that it can return. So we're just calling a anonymous function, essentially again here, because we don't have a name for it. And we're just having a little alert, a pop-up that will say, failed. So this way we immediately know, hey, something is not working correctly here.
Yeah.
So
you know, if you change the URL, for example, there,
yes.
and had an incorrect URL, in theory,
yeah.
it should return something along an error.
That's right. Actually, let's try that out real quick. Oh, you know, because I was pointing towards the JavaScript file and not the actual index. Let's go again.
And that's one of the nice things about, you know, working in Visual Studio.
Probably got me there. Yeah, that's definitely what that was. So we'll come back to that shortly.
The one nice thing here about Visual Studio is that, you know, you go to hit Internet Explorer or whatever, you know,
yes.
and it runs it, it creates a server for you. You can have your file package anywhere. A lot of people who are working, I know I do a lot of times too, is I have like my htdocs or wherever I'm, you know, my web server. I might be using WAMP or MAMP depending on platform or that kind of thing. But here it's like I could point to my GitHub repository that's in documents.
That's it.
Just click there and, you know, it takes care of launching the server for me.
That's right. Quickly throws the server together for you. So I don't know if I would use alert in production because it's not a very most professional looking thing. Yeah. But if you're right here, which is developing here in the studio, I want to use alert because I immediately want to be made aware of what's actually happening behind the scenes. Again, post is not radically different from what we have here either. So we have our REST post, and you see the syntax looks nearly identical to what Stacy wrote earlier. Again, before send, we're going to set header. Our data this time, though, is evangelist. You're probably thinking, what is evangelist? Well, it's an object that I'm passing.
What is evangelist?
Yes. I know, I couldn't have spread the good word. So
well played, well played.
So our REST post function right here, we're passing in an object called evangelist. Well, where is this coming from? Okay, let's go up right here. The event handler. So let's go back actually to our PowerPoint real quick. Adding event handlers. I want to make sure we're on the same slide here. So, So what this event handler allows me to do is actually tie in a function to that click. So there are many different ways to kind of write event handlers. This isn't the only syntax we have to do, but it works well.
What kind of events can you get? Like, I mean, we're looking at someone's clicked a button. That's an event, right?
Yes.
Someone clicks something.
What if something's
getting dispatched?
Yes.
You know, and it gets that click event kind of gets fired. But what other kind of events are there that someone might use often in an application?
Oh, well, I have mouse down, or click is one event, or mouse up is another. Perhaps hover, right? If I'm hovering over something on a page, you can see right here, even in Visual Studio, as I start to hover towards the top, you see how the color in the background starts to change, suddenly yellow to notify me. Well, I can make another event for just on hover right there.
Right.
And that'll then call whatever function I have here.
Right.
So I can either make an anonymous function, which I've gone ahead and done right here, because I'm only going to use it one time, or I could have this so when I click, maybe I want to just have, I don't know, set header, right? I could do something as simple as that. I'm going to place this anonymous one with click. So very quickly, with our little button, when it finds this button, add evangelist, which see, I actually did not cache there, but I probably should have, right?
Oh, Dave.
I know. We don't have it there, but see, there are two different ways. So either I can reference it there every time, or I could have cached it up here. So when I click that button, and by that button I mean this bad boy right here. There we go. I don't know what happened there.
Just in case you don't know which button it is, it's this one.
This one. So when I go to click that button, now I'm going to say, okay, evangelist, I'm going to take that object, which I took. So it's taking the name and the value. So again, we're looking at this jQuery thing. And you can see even Visual Studio starts to actually highlight everything as I'm clicking on it. So I click on name there. It also highlights name right up here. Okay, same thing at location.
That's awesome if you need to refactor something, for example.
Yes.
Just like change the name, boom.
And I can see right away where it's actually being affected. So what I'm doing is I'm taking this jQuery object, the name, which points to the name object, the name field. Where is it? So it's taking whatever the value I typed in here and whatever value I typed in there. It's wrapping it in an object. That is my evangelist object. And then I'm calling that REST post, and I'm passing in basically the name and the location.
So does everything in terms of the DOM, if you're dealing with an input field, right? Mm-hmm. But there's, we've got anchors, we have H1s, we have all of that great markup. Does everything have a val method attached to it, or is it only inputs? Anything that has a val has got to be coming from like something that someone inputs, right? So, so those kind of things, you'd be using val to figure out what text was entered, right? And those kind of things also have change events and things like that you can capture as well.
And kind of parse through strings and look through them, and maybe even set up some kind of functionality where you'd say, like, whoa, you typed in numbers there, or integers or floats. I'm not looking for a number. I'm actually looking for a string, some kind of name value there.
So like as soon as someone starts typing, you're going to do like validation of some sort.
Yes.
That's the word, validation.
Yes, another good part of Ajax. Okay, so we can do all this validation client side instead of having to pass it back server side now.
Yeah, there's no point sending it and then only for them to come back to you and be like,
say, oh, actually it's wrong.
Yeah, you always want to do that check beforehand and also have server side probably check it, depending on what they need. And at least you're doing your due diligence, right, on the client side.
Oh yeah, definitely. It's like sometimes you'll start to like enter in a name or a password, and it's like,
Is that
this
how you
doesn't
type,
look
actually?
right.
I love how you
like
type.
This. I have little dinosaur hands.
T-Rex typing. Boop, 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 boop. That's awesome.
So again, I'm just taking this evangelist object, and on success, I'm saying like, hey, for everything here, we're going to add an evangelist and pass in that data. Perfect. So it looks good to me. And on error, we're going to say, again, a little alert that pops up and says, failed.
So you're looking at the success and the error, and that's actually pretty much a promise object, right?
Yes.
And promises are often used in JavaScript for asynchronous calls because when you're going to get this data, it's not automatically populated. There's going to be a certain amount of time, right, that it takes to get populated. It's not something that's just like this is equal to this. It's this is equal to this process.
Yeah.
I'm going to a server, I'm grabbing it, I'm bringing it back. So that asynchronous process is why you have those success and error handlers, because when there's success, let's do this. So you always got to think about things like that a little bit, right?
Oh yeah, definitely. So kind of wrapping up full circle here. Wrapping it up. So when and why would you use jQuery? Well, you're going to use jQuery if you really need systems to help get your project off the ground. Again, we're using for animations, DOM traversal, kind of working with some of the standards that we have on browsers. So it's really just there to kind of simplify our life. But again, it's not the silver bullet or the end-all be-all for web or JavaScript development, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I think jQuery, what we've shown is just and again, it's going to be the same thing that we're going to show in Angular, very top-level things of like common things you might need to do.
Yeah.
And jQuery, I mean, would you consider jQuery a library or framework?
It's definitely a framework. Well, that's actually a very good question.
It's a really hard question. It's like this big debate. But the thing with jQuery is it gives you so much functionality that we're not showing you.
It kind of could be both, yeah.
Yeah, jQuery is just a beast. Again, there's a lot of stuff that can, if you really adopt it, you can do loops easier, for example. You can do complex DOM manipulations. You can do animations. You can do all those things. So I don't know about when it comes to jQuery, I choose to use jQuery when I know I'm going to use a good percentage of the things that it offers.
Right.
Because it is quite big.
Yeah, even try to minify it, it's still quite a bit of bloat you're adding to the end user.
Right, like if I'm just going to do animations, I'm not going to use jQuery. I'm going to either try to do them vanilla, I might use a library, I might use something different because I don't need that footprint. Yeah,
there are tons of tweening libraries and things out there you can use as well.
Right, but if I'm going to use animation, if I think I'm going to use the Ajax calls, if I'm going to use a bunch of that stuff that, and I'm doing something quick, I would consider jQuery for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Again, we can reference it either via a content distribution network where it's going to be hosted on several servers across the world. Again, there are many that you can use. You saw the one I had there earlier. Or we can store it locally. Often if you want IntelliSense, that is the ability to have your JavaScript be familiar with what you're doing. You can quickly
Gives you all the good code hinting.
Yes, exactly.
So you just go doop, 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 comes up in a list, you select it, and you're like, done.
Yeah, so in that case,
Makes
you can
your life so
often
quick.
store it locally so that this way you can always have that sort of sense of IntelliSense. Even Visual Studio has plenty of extensions that give you that as well.
So for jQuery as well, when we're looking at jQuery in terms of building applications, there's also, I mean, and this is something, again, that's why there's going to be a full class on jQuery in a couple weeks, an intro to jQuery, but there's like even another library that's built on top of jQuery that's like jQuery mobile, and it gives you all of animations that are typically used for mobile, the idea of a screen, you know, sliding, things like that. All sorts of plugins built on top of jQuery.
You can roll your own UI in different colors and things like that.
Yeah, so jQuery is one of those things where it really depends on what you're building.
Yeah.
I think it's really good if you're a one-off person.
Definitely.
And no one else is going to touch your code. And you know that you're building something in terms of a single-page app that's fairly simple. I think jQuery is a very good solution.
Yeah, definitely.
I think it's very quick.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, I agree. Looking back on projects I'd done in the past, we had used just jQuery, and I wish that Angular had a larger presence at the time, because it really would have helped us to get the project off the ground. Maybe Angular jQuery is great to start with, but as we got larger and larger, I would have loved to have used something like Angular to really help the debugging and just having our syntax much cleaner.
Yeah, and I mean, if we look at what you showed, for example, everything in your file, everything's in one file. You're referencing the DOM, you're referencing data, you're referencing behavior, you're referencing state. Everything's just there.
Yeah, there's not really much of a separation. I'm very, very tied into what I have.
Right.
There.
So is that good or bad? I don't know.
Yeah.
But it is definitely one of those things, you know, I don't want to argue those points necessarily, but it's one of those things where it's in one place.
Yeah.
So sometimes, depending on what you're building, if it's getting bigger and more complex, that can become a little bit unmanageable.
Yeah, as you start to scale, you'll really start to understand the value of something like an MVC framework.
Yeah. Okay. There you go.
And finally, we use get to retrieve data from the server, as well as post to push it to the server. And you saw before, Stace was really going through how to create a mobile service, how simple it was to actually create a service, to hit your own backend and retrieve and post data. You
mean when I started one and then showed an original one? But yeah.
That's why I don't do live coding. You see, like the demo gods are not always with me, but in this case, I think it did turn out so well.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, once again, very, very simple. REST API just there to use.
Yeah.
And you did a good job at just like grabbing some jQuery and showing how to get it, how to post it, you know, and you can start to add in the other behaviors that you might want to add in, like creating in things, not showing things if there's no data, you know, those kind of things, error states, all that kind of stuff.
So again, take this, have some fun with it. If you haven't used jQuery or any of this before, it's probably a great starting point to then start to append some of those things like you said before.
Yeah. I think what we're actually going to go through next probably is just, you showed a lot of code.
Yeah.
Awesome. But how do you actually go and debug it?
Right.
Right? Like, what are some of the tools that we can use for that? Because when it comes to understanding, how you're building an application and you're dynamically loading things in the DOM and you're changing things on the fly, there's, you need those good debugging tools. So I think we'll cover that in the next session.
Beautiful. Yeah, so we'll be back in about 10 minutes, so be sure to come back then. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us or Michael Palermo in the chat, and I'll be sure to get back to you shortly.
Thanks, Michael.
Thanks.